Welcome to Reading Between the Reels. I'm Craig Dickinson.
And I'm Matt Leader. Today on the show, we are taking a look at a individual episode of The Mandalorian from Disney Plus, which is season 1, chapter 8, Redemption. So, Craig, what are your overall thoughts on this particular episode?
Well, I have to say that I really do like this episode. We each got to pick an episode, and this was your pick, and I was very glad to rewatch it. My biggest takeaway from this is that this is kind of the episode we finally get to know. We get to know a lot about Din Djarin. We get the name, we get to see his face, and we get that full flashback of his parents' death and kind of his adoption by Death Watch. And so, it's a huge episode. We haven't really gotten into it a lot more since this episode, but it definitely promises a lot moving forward for the show. What about you?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that it's a pretty fitting end to season 1. I also think that, like you said, it leaves the door open to a lot to explore. One of the things I enjoyed the most were the two speeder bike troopers at the beginning. You have, of course, the horrible punching of Baby Yoda, right? And I remember first time we watched this, my wife was freaking out. She's like, "Don't you do that to Baby Yoda?" And so, I mean, you got that kind of evil, sinister piece right there. But then just the comedy between the two troopers, where you've got, the left and the right, and the left one keeps asking questions and he keeps, kind of pestering the other trooper, and you see the boredom, and they take out their little mini blasters, and they're like trying to shoot a rock, I think it is. And they're missing. And then the other one tries it and he misses too. So it's like, it's one of those jokes for Star Wars, like the stormtroopers can't hit anything. But, back from the original, no one has as precise aim as Imperial stormtroopers. So I really enjoy that. And I think that right there is part of what I love about Mandalorian, is that it adds a little bit of character, a little bit of world building to Star Wars that we don't always get when we are slavishly attached to the Skywalker family tree. You don't have that kind of levity. And I think that kind of humor might be out of place in one of the 9 Skywalker movies, right? But this is kind of the perfect opportunity. This was directed by Taika Waititi, who has a great, fantastic sense of humor in his films. So that definitely shines. It's probably my favorite moment from this episode.
Yeah, I think I'd have to agree, because a lot of the stuff that I pulled out for my favorite cinematic moments were actually from that sequence. And I remember thinking, first time I watched it, how brave it was to kind of linger with these guys. They spend a significant amount of time on your season finale, where there's, it's kind of left on a cliffhanger in the previous episode about what happened with Quill, and also with, Moff Gideon showing up, and then we're going to hang out in the desert with a couple of scout troopers and spend some time kind of getting to know these guys. But it's a lot of fun. And, this is pre Ted Lasso, but looking back now, both you and I are big Ted Lasso fans. Ted Lasso's punching a Baby Yoda. That's just not cool. But it's hilarious at the same time. And of course, the scene where they're trying to hit that piece of junk or rock or whatever it is actually one of my favorite pieces of cinematography. The way that it is framed is, you have whatever they're shooting, the target is in the foreground, and they're kind of off to the right hand side shooting at it. And I think it's amazingly that they composed it that way, so that whatever they're shooting at is so close to us, it kind of amplifies how bad of shots these guys are. And that's just a running gag, on the internet, and has been forever, how bad, shots stormtroopers are. So to just play that up and then shake the gun and that kind of squishy sound as they're doing it.
It's got it sounds like a rattle, like a spray can rattle.
Yeah, it's kind of that deal. They also have a great thing where, Taika Waititi's character, IG-11, shows up, and you have this really awesome kind of rule of thirds where this also kind of a triangle where they're looking at him uh, as he comes down the middle and then executes these guys. And so it's kind of like, don't mess with Baby Yoda. Like, this is what happens when you do. So they get their comeuppance.
Yeah. And IG-11's fantastic in this episode too. And you understand why Mando doesn't like droids with his flashback. You understand why he is so devoted to the Mandalorians, or at least that sect of the Mandalorians. But then you kind of have that touching moment where, IG-11, he shows what I would say is a little bit of humanity. You see some of the droids in Star Wars show some humanity where he cares for Mando and brings him back right at the end, when we kind of feel like Mando might be going away, because I can't remember if we knew there was going to be a season 2 at that point.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but there is definitely, and even if there was, we don't know for sure what's going to happen with him. That we don't know for sure that Din Djarin's going to make it through the episode. And, there is a level of gravitas in this episode that, we finally get to see his helmet taken off. It's like, we know he was never going to do that. And so that's almost a goodbye too, in some ways.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, a lot of weight to this episode. Balanced nicely with the levity from IG-11, who makes jokes too, but he makes the joke about your processor being damaged. And he's like,
yeah.
I was just trying to lighten the moment, or whatever he says. It's pretty great. Did you have any other moments of cinematography that you wanted to point out?
Yeah, the biggest one that stood out to me, and a lot of the episode felt paced pretty well. I thought the editing worked fairly well. Like, it did linger a little bit, but it lingered in that comedic sense, which I liked. The one shot that grabbed me was when the flame trooper comes in and he busts down the door or something like that. He comes in and you see a shot that's set behind Grogu's head. And I want to say like he is slightly out of focus. Mm-hmm. And you see the flame trooper in the background. And as he ignites the flamethrower, it flashes out towards Grogu, towards us. And of course, we know Grogu is going to use the Force. We know we can read that into the scene, right? But you also see the wonder and amazement in the other characters' faces when Grogu does that, because they haven't seen it before. And that was a really cool shot of kind of putting us in Grogu's perspective, but it's also like a really heroic moment for Grogu as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you pulled that out. That is a great moment. We kind of know what's going to happen, but it's still, we want the payoff, and then we get it. Speaking of payoff, I mentioned earlier, this was we've been teased the backstory for Din Djarin most of this season, and then we get the extended backstory. Finally, get the whole story, and this time what I was struck by was how much it's in slow motion and the shaky cam, and it's very different than most of the rest of the episode. And, they take the time to do this whole sequence, they're in imminent danger. And all of a sudden you've got, here's what's going on in Din's head, thinking about, how was his start to becoming a Mandalorian. And that's brave, I think, just to kind of take those moments. You know what? We're going to pause the near-death experience and give some exposition here.
Mm-hmm. And I also think that flashback scene is a bit heavier than, and what I mean specifically by that is we see a lot of super battle droids, and they're quite intimidating. They're quite scary in that flashback, which is a little different than the super battle droids that we see in live action movies in like Attack of the Clones. I think we might see some of them. And then, of course, in Return of the Sith.
Revenge of the Sith, yeah.
Revenge of the Sith, yes. Yeah. Where the battle droids are kind of a farce. They're kind of a joke.
Absolutely.
In a lot of the live action film. And I enjoy the fact that these are portrayed as scary things, because they would be if you were actually there. So I enjoyed that part of the flashback as well.
Yeah, I like that you pointed that out, because now that I'm thinking about it, the last time we had seen them live action, R2D2 takes out a couple. They're just stupid, right? He lights them on fire, and then Obi-Wan Kenobi going up
squirts
the
oil,
steps.
squirts oil on them, and it's just like,
yeah, that's it. And then Obi-Wan Kenobi like kills two of them or destroys two of them with like a flick of his wrist going up the steps to fight Dooku. So it's like they're not remotely a threat. And now we've kind of reestablished that. And obviously from the perspective of a child, it would be terrifying.
Yes.
What about sound? Was there anything that stood out to you? Because for me, I hear that speeder bike whine, and that takes me back to 8 years old immediately. I love that sound so much. And you get some real dynamic shots of that. And so you get that Doppler effect as well as the beginning with both. Well, and then once IG-11 takes after he takes care of business with the scout troopers, he's driving it too. So that's just one of my favorite Star Wars sounds, period.
For me, what stood out to me was that there were moments that didn't feel as Star Warsy as far as soundtrack is concerned. A lot of Star Wars has a very symphonic score, and not that this doesn't have it, like the twang of the opening of The Mandalorian. I would still say, it's different, but it's not like far off. But there were a couple of moments where it felt the instruments, whatever they were using, it didn't sound quite as classic Star Wars, if that's what you want to say. And, I didn't mind it. I would rather have them do something different than keep doing the same thing over and over again. So that just stood out to me as, okay, they're kind of stretching their legs a little bit to see what other spaces they can explore with the soundtrack.
Yeah, I noticed that too. And so would it be fair to say, first off, you're a fan of Ludwig Göransson's score for Mandalorian?
Overall, yeah.
Yeah, me too. And
it's not my favorite, but I think it is good.
Yeah, I remember just kind of flashing back to the first episode of The Mandalorian, and when he's writing the blurgs, he and Quill are writing the blurgs, that I heard something that sounded very reminiscent of the Rocky theme. And I was like, wow, that sounds like Rocky. And then later about going back through and like, oh yeah, Ludwig Göransson did Creed and used those themes. So that makes total sense for using that now in The Mandalorian. I did notice a couple of things too, like you mentioned, that's kind of the non-traditional symphonic music is, when again, back to that, the flashback sequence, there's some very like prominent electrical guitar as as the Death Watch guy he's put his hand out to offer help. And then I think my favorite thing though is where they kind of have when Din Djarin grabs the E-web, he kind of sees it, and they have like that little whistle kind of stinger, which is very reminiscent of like The Man with No Name, like the Clint Eastwood spaghetti western stuff. Little snippets of his theme. So that's kind of fun. You're like, oh, something cool is going to happen. So I always like hearing those little stingers.
How'd you feel about the acting?
Yeah. I think it's well acted. I don't think that anybody stands out. I think probably the weakest, just because of lack of experience, is Gina Carano, but I think she's fine. Gina Carano is fine. And I really like her character a lot. She's very much a, shoot first, ask questions, maybe. I love Carl Weathers, always have. Speaking of Rocky, right? So you have that connection as well. He's super charismatic. And it's interesting to see that he's kind of taken this turn from basically a villain the first time we meet him, that he's now Din trusts him too. And like, we can root for this guy. But probably the standout is Giancarlo Esposito as Moff Gideon. He's just so evil and just chewing scenery left and right. What about you? What do you think?
It's really interesting because I'll say first that I think Gina Carano is fine. I don't think it's particularly inspired, but I think she's holding her own. I really enjoy Carl Weathers, and I enjoy him more as the second season progresses of Mandalorian. In no particular reason, but the more time we spend with him, the more I enjoy him. Emily Swallow as the armor just has a great scene. Yes. There's not a lot, like, I don't want to say there's not a lot of acting, but it's like a very, very cool little fight scene there.
Yeah, I really like
Taika Waititi.
the cadence she uses when she's talking, because that's not her.
Yeah.
She's kind of doing an affected voice. But you were saying about
Sure,
Taika Waititi.
IG-11 is fantastic. I already kind of mentioned that. I love him. And just the voiceover is fun. I was not the biggest fan of Giancarlo Esposito as Moff Gideon. Okay. I felt it was kind of overacted and performed, like he was like he was reading the lines, and they're just, the lines are rough in my ears. They're rough sound, like it's overwritten. Something like he looks smug, which sure, but it's like it just does not come off as authentic as, I don't know. It just doesn't quite work for me.
I hear you. You know, he's monologuing a little bit like a Bond villain.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wrote down some of his stuff. There's one, he says, "Your astute panic suggests you understand your situation." Yeah.
Yeah.
He's highly educated, and kind of pushing the boundaries a little bit there. Sure.
Yeah. And it doesn't work for me, where he doesn't disappear into that role of the Grand Moff. And I think part of it is that a lot of the acting is on the more static side for a lot of the characters in this show.
Sure.
And so, like, you've got the armor, obviously you've got Mando. I think Carl Weathers is a little bit more, not cheesy, right? But he's more dramatic than the others. But Gina Carano's acting is also more static. And then you have Grand Moff, and he's kind of hamming it up a little bit. And to me, that kind of took me out of the film a little bit, or not film, but the TV show a little bit, where it kind of waves a little bit, right? Where it's a little overacted, but so much of the other is kind of, even the humor at the beginning is kind of more of a static, deadpan humor. And then you get those lines that it just doesn't work for me. I will also quickly throw in that I love Pedro Pascal. I was a big fan of him from Game of Thrones. I think he's a fantastic actor. And there is an HBO show, The Last of Us, that he's starring in, which I am extremely looking forward to. I am not the biggest fan of the acting in The Mandalorian as a whole. And we've talked about this before. I think that the fact that Pedro Pascal wears his helmet through 98% of the show does a bit of a disservice to the audience connecting with The Mandalorian in the show. So I threw out, I've been talking for a little bit. Just tell me some of your thoughts.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And I think that's one of the moments in this episode that is why it's such a good episode, is when the helmet comes off. And I remember when I watched this the first time, my wife and I were watching it with our kids, and my wife turned to me and said, "Is he ever going to take the helmet off? I want to see what he looks like." And I was like, "Well, I don't know if he's going to." And then he does. And in the moment where he does, I think is really powerful. And I'm going to read the line. So IG-11 says, "I need to remove your helmet if I'm to save you." And he says, "Try it and I'll kill you. It's forbidden. No living thing has seen me without my helmet since I swore the creed." And IG-11 replies, "I am not a living thing," which I think is so simple and so brilliant that we can, we've kind of painted ourselves into this corner, but like, here's the loophole. You're right. He's not a living thing. He's not alive. And so it's okay that we do this in this situation here.
Mm-hmm.
So we get that payoff. We get this, he kind of gets to breathe, and we get to see his face and empathize with him. He's tore up. He usually has that, very steely, obviously, no pun intended, exterior. I mean, very emotionless. And then here we finally get to see him vulnerable. Did you have any lines that you did like in this film, in this episode that really stood out to you?
Yeah. The whole speeder bike conversation, fantastic.
Yeah.
Towards the end, so IG-11's line about not being like a living being, that too. But Carl Weathers' line as they're exiting the lava tunnel, and they see Moff Gideon in the TIE fighter, and I can't quite remember if it's like right after or right before. But he turns to Grogu and he's like, "Do the magic hand wavy thing," and Grogu waves. And then Carl Weather goes, "Well, I'm all out of ideas."
Yeah, that's it.
Love that.
What did you think he was going to do? That's awesome. So good.
So that was my line of the episode. That was the best one right there.
Yeah, that's pretty solid. That's one I've used many times. I can't remember where it always comes from, or always remember where it came from, but there it is. It's from this episode. I also really like the. It's not really quotable, but I like the part where we hear that the Mandalorian being a Mandalorian isn't necessarily a race, that it's a creed. I thought that was cool, that we get a little bit more world building with like, what does it mean to be a Mandalorian? I think that's, one of the themes of this episode and the next one that we're going to do is, what does that actually mean? To say you're a Mandalorian can mean multiple things. And, as it's kind of a meta commentary too, right? That we as Star Wars fans have this view of what is a Mandalorian and what is not. And apparently there's also some confusion in universe as well, right? Grief Karga thinks, well, you had to have been born on Mandalore to be a Mandalorian, but we find that that's not necessarily true.
And going off of that, just into some of the design and some of the world building, which I think are kind of tied up together. I absolutely love parts of this. The way that Mando takes down the TIE fighter is fantastic. I think that it is one of those unconventional outside the box solutions to a problem that I think are fantastic. And I love seeing, it's one thing where it's okay, you shoot a stormtrooper with a blaster. Okay, whatever, but the fact that he's facing off against a TIE fighter and uses his jetpack and grappling hook and these little explosives, all of that is just a tremendous fun. I will say that The Mandalorian as a whole, like a whole series, and you see it in this episode, the stormtroopers are just goobers. I mean,
Sure.
Like they're like glorified battle droids where they're nothing. They're cannon fodder. They get mowed down like nothing. Their armor does nothing. And that's always bugged me a little bit. And like, I know the whole, like, they're a terrible shot is like, kind of a joke, but it's a little jarring to watch like Mando get shot 15 times and it to hit his Beskar armor, every time. Right. And then the stormtroopers take one shot and they're just instantly dead. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's how much better the Beskar is. One could argue.
Okay. But it again, it's one of those things that starts to pull me out just a little bit, where it seems like Mandalorian is he's the main character, so he's just better than it, a little bit of plot armor along with his Beskar.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Stormtroopers have become very much a joke, which is one of the reasons I appreciate that the Death Troopers show up, which we've never seen them be cannon fodder or, worthless or easily killed. And so when you see that, it's like, oh, okay, this is a legitimate threat. We've seen these guys. These guys are tough. So just having them there kind of ups the ante a little bit, raises the stakes a little bit, I thought. So that I had that under costumes. We got to see those guys again, which is just kind of a fun nod. And also it's like immediately takes, oh yeah, Rogue One. That's right. That's a good movie. I should watch that again, which is fun. I had a question though, and I'm hoping that we'll get some more answers about this. But this time, especially looking at Din Djarin's family and the way that they're dressed, to me, those hooded robes looked almost kind of monk-like, almost like a religious order. And I'm wondering if we'll ever get backstory. I hope that we do, as I think that there's probably some really interesting stories that could be told about, like why are the separatists attacking this planet? Is there anything, politically that's tied to also like the religious beliefs of this culture? I don't know. That just something that just kind of jumped out at me this time. Like, wow, that really is a completely different costume design than we're seeing throughout most of the show.
Yeah, I had never thought about that. I think that would be a very cool direction to take it. I don't know. I don't know what
Yeah, no,
what direction we're going to take.
asking the
And
questions is always
I'm
the
going to
fun
save
part.
I'm going to save some of this for our next episode because I've got some thoughts about some of this stuff. That anyway, I'll save it for next episode.
Perfect.
But
Can't wait to hear it. I did also want to mention, speaking, it's kind of costumes. It's also kind of set decoration, by the way we see it, is just seeing that pile of Mandalorian helmets when they go looking for the covert down in the sewers. I think is a really nice payoff for what we saw when they're revealing the sin, where it's very in the third episode, the sin, where we kind of know that they've been hiding out so that this doesn't happen, and then of course they show up and save Mando and Grogu.
It's kind of chilling.
Yeah, there is a consequence, and getting to see that in that way, it's almost like bones and remains. The coolest prop has to be, though, in my opinion, has to be the dark saber. Just getting to see it live action, adapted from the Clone Wars, did not see that coming at all. And then, wow, holy smokes! Like we just, and again, kind of going back to world building, like we are fully bringing in things from the Clone Wars and the Clone Wars TV show, where again it's rewarding you for paying attention, for being invested, and it's kind of a weird balance you kind of strike, I suppose with your audience, where some of them, a good majority of them, probably don't have any idea what that is or what the significance is. I mean, and I guess it kind of works. It's like, wow, that guy has a cool laser sword versus, oh my gosh, he has the dark saber. There's a story there.
And I'm a little sour about this stuff because it feels like fan service a little bit. I mean, it depends on how they use, and how it's used in the story. And the other one that popped out to me was the E-Web blaster, because I recognized it first time I watched the episode from the old cross section, the old Star Wars books that had like all the list of weapons and all that kind of stuff. It's like, oh, that's an E-Web. They make a really big deal about it.
Yeah.
They talk about the E-Web for a long time. And it's just like, it's just a fancy laser. Like there's, I don't know. But I think it's kind of like a wink and a nod towards those fans who it's like, oh, look, we're pulling stuff out from way back. And I kind of get that a little bit with the Darksaber too. It's fine.
There you go. Not everything's going to land for everybody. And
yeah,
I totally get what you're saying. It is a very tenuous line to try and walk between fan service and, just kind of including things that will connect everything, right? But not do it in a heavy-handed way. That's a really tough thing to do. And this show, I think,
it felt a little heavy-handed this episode.
Yeah. I think for the most part, the show does a good job of kind of bringing things back in, but there's going to be moments where you slip into that kind of clunky fan service.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else world building or anything else from any other categories before we get to final thoughts?
No, I think, it's a little 30-minute episode. So there's, those are the main things that I kind of wanted to talk about.
Yeah. I think my last thing is I just want to see more of the armorer because she's awesome. And this is the last time we've seen her in the show. And I think it's just a great character. Again, like you mentioned, Emily Swallow's performance is really good. I really do. I think her voice is very commanding. It's just, again, I use the word gravitas probably way too often, but like you respect her. I want to know her backstory. How did she get into this role? And she clearly knows the lore. She talks about Mandalore the Great and knows about the Jedi and how to she bosses. She's the boss too, right? She gives, Din his quest for season 2. I'd kind of like to know more about her and at least see her more in the show.
Yeah, I completely agree.
All right, you want to get at it, wrap this thing up?
Let's do it.
Cool.
So as we close, we just want to say thank you so much for listening. If you would like to connect with us, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook, email us at readingbetweenreels@gmail.com, or use the SpeakPipe app on our website.
If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a review on your favorite podcast catcher. We'd love to hear your feedback, and it really helps us get the word out about the podcast. And if you haven't yet, please join our Facebook group. It's a safe place to share your thoughts and discuss all things related to movies.
One last thing, our next episode will be a review of season 2, chapter 14, The Tragedy of The Mandalorian. Send us an email or voicemail about your favorite moments from The Mandalorian, and we'll share them on the next episode.